Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Samantha.
And I'm Thomas.
And this is Trans IRL.
We have a great show for you tonight. We'll be talking about transgender representation in films and TV shows.
For many transgender individuals, the first time we were exposed to other trans people was through the media, television, movies, books, or magazines. The publication of stories about trans people in popular media began in Europe when Lily Elba's transition was exposed in 1930. When American Christine Jorgensen transitioned in the early 1950s, her story became one of the first to be widely published in the United States. Less than a year after Christine's story was published, the movie Glenn or Glenda was released by director Ed Wood, one of the first films released to a wider audience concerning trans individuals.
In the years following, trans representation in media has been contentious, and only recently has it begun to show some improvement. We'll be looking back at some of that history and discuss how it impacted our transitions as well. Tonight, we're broadcasting live on YouTube and Facebook, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask, leave them in that chat, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the show. So now, onto the show. Our guest tonight is a senior digital content producer, has a master's in film studies, and is a former film and music critic. I'd like to introduce Neila Karassik to the program. Hi, Neila.
Hey, how's it going? So Brady Bunch.
Good. I know, I love it. So why don't we start with you just going ahead and introducing yourself a little bit for the audience before we dive into tonight's topic.
Sure. Well, so I'm originally from Montreal, and I moved to Toronto in 2008 after finishing film school, and I worked at the Toronto International Film Festival for a few years, and also had a side gig going as a film and music critic for some alt-weekly newspapers in Toronto. And that led into a producing job with Bell Media, which is kind of a big Canadian multi-brand network that has like Much Music and MTV and CTV and Space Comedy, HBO Canada. And so my life has always been very much kind of enmeshed with popular culture and films and television. And so I guess what puts me on this show is that I transitioned at the beginning of 2018. Well, I started HRT at the end of 2017, and in January 2018, I came out, and just here we are. I still work at the same place, have the same friends, eat the same burgers, but film and television are still very near and dear to me, and I obviously have a different sort of understanding of it, and I'm kind of trying to unpack that and how it all influenced me growing up as someone was a child of divorce and very much raised in front of the television. And while TV and movies had such a huge impact in my life and really kept me a lot of company, there was a lot of kind of ambivalent feelings that I had growing up from early childhood until today. And so I'm really excited to talk about this subject with others like myself, and we can all kind of jam on how this impacted us in our love-hate relationship with big and small screen.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really great conversation. I know a lot of the movies we're looking at today, we had feedback from our viewers who sent comments into the show, like, this movie in particular is one that really impacted me as a kid. So I do want to get into some of those here. We are looking at these movies kind of broken up into several categories. And I wanted to start with a couple films that were kind of problematic for me as a closeted trans kid growing up in the 90s. And these were movies that cast trans people as people who were deceivers or liars. And on top of that, these were movies that were largely focused towards younger audiences. So a lot of kids at that point in time watched these films. And even today, kids are still watching these films, which, isn't always the best thing. So let's take a look at some of these films here.
So yeah, I could get into one movie that I'm sure everyone's familiar with, and it's a family film, allegedly, and it has some really kind of harrowing moments in it that tie into a much more serious film that was nominated for Oscars. This film certainly was not, but it did launch the career of a very prominent, funny man who goes by the name of Jim Carrey. He's from Canada, where I'm from. That's Jim, the crazy hair. This is the film that launched his career. It's his first kind of big vehicle, and it made a lot of money. There he is, retching into the toilet after he's made a revelation that he has been sexually attracted to and even made out with a trans woman. So this is a really impactful, it's a really harsh representation, in as much that this person who is trans is a psychopathic killer. It's an ex-football player who takes on the identity of a police chief, and I don't think that they're actually transitioning for their own gender identity purposes. And this is off a very like repeated, oh dear. Okay, this is hard to talk through, but this kind of trope, that this ongoing thing is, these are not people who are really dealing or struggling with their identity, but rather trying to trick people or get away with a crime or be someone else. And while they're not necessarily trans people, I do still think that it plants a seed, and it kind of creates a certain vibe that trans people are not to be trusted, and that they're duplicitous, and that they're schemers, and that they trick heterosexual men into being attracted to them. And, you know, they probably have a wake of dead bodies behind them also. So that doesn't really help how everyone's feeling in this climate in the 90s, where people are already just trying to get over, there's a lot of homophobia in film and stuff, and trans people were really totally thrown under the bus. And seeing this film when I was a young child, I didn't really understand the Crying Game connection. What I want to know, so the Crying Game is a song that plays, and every time that it's brought up that this character is not who they believe them to be. So The Crying Game was a Oscar-winning film. Jay Davidson, this is Jay Davidson, who won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, because he's cis male, playing a trans woman named Dill, who is has a relationship with an IRA agent, played by Stephen Ray here. And this was the first really popular kind of movie that had prestige, and was also in some ways sympathetic towards a trans character, but did still rely on that big reveal where they actually do show full frontal nudity, and Stephen Ray's reaction is to punch Gil, and they eventually do become romantically involved. But Ace Ventura, a family film, presumably for children, where a guy in a Hawaiian shirt like talks through his butt and has crazy hair and rescues animals, I don't really think has any business like riffing on a much more serious film that handles that in a completely different light. So as a child, it was kind of jarring to see that. And it just feels very shoehorned into the film, because they're like, oh, this came out last year. Who cares if it's about this minority, but this is hilarious. And so I had to see that in the theater with my mom. And by then I was already kind of I knew who I was. And it started a long chain of events in which I'm not alone in that. I had to kind of sit there and just like kind of laugh with everyone else and sort of feel a little crushed at the same time. I don't know if everyone else feels that way, but maybe.
Definitely. I've been there. And I mean, that is, I think, something that a lot of trans people experience, right? When there's, especially growing up and watching movies like these, and people are laughing at this person, and you just have to kind of sit there and go, okay, this is funny. This is funny to me. And it was actually like just seeing those scenes just kind of like brought me back of just like how much those movies or how much Ace Ventura affected me when I was a kid. And this was probably the movie that was brought up the most by viewers before tonight's episode was Ace Ventura, because a lot of us saw this at very formative ages. I mean, this movie came out in 1994. I was 11 years old. I would have seen it right around then when I was 11. I was already dealing with some of these thoughts, and here's, a trans person cast as a liar, cast as someone who was dealing with psychological issues. That's a big plot point of the film, is that this person was driven to madness and transitioned as part of their way to get vengeance on somebody. And along the way became a psychopathic murderer. Why not, right? And that's a lot to handle when you're 11 years old. You're already doubting who you are and your identity. And one of your first exposures to other trans individuals is a person like this. it's really damaging. And then not only are you exposed to it, but then people are laughing at this person, and this person is a laughing stock. And it's funny that Ace Ventura made out with this individual, and that's all just way too much to process for a tween. And it's not just my generation. I think generations after us too. This movie became a staple on basic cable packages, right? They probably still air it. I wouldn't be surprised, because ostensibly it's a comedy. But it has this terrible underlying message in it that trans people are not trustworthy, are liars, are hiding something from people, this big secret. And I mean, to a lesser extent, this is the same situation in The Crying Game, although that film is much more critically acclaimed and the story progresses in a much less comedic manner. It is still the big reveal, right? The big secret that's uncovered, that forces a cis male, for all intents and purposes, to come to terms with being attracted to a trans individual. And that is kind of a trope that gets played time and time again in these films.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned that it still plays a lot, because I do bring up Ace Ventura a lot, because people do say like, I love Jim Carrey, Ace Ventura. And a lot of my cis friends or even non-trans friends, they completely sort of forget that there's this huge act to the film, this whole like kind of insidious element to it. And then once I kind of start talking to them about it, they're like, oh yeah, that is pretty problematic, and that's really weird. And why is that still on network television all the time? Or if that was made now, there'd be kind of an uproar. And also, I just have such a beef with that film because it is marketed as a children's family film, and it just seems really reprehensible to do that. And with that, I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about another film that is marketed towards families and stars another beloved late comedian, and that's Mrs. Doubtfire. I was really excited to see Mrs. Doubtfire as a kid because of the gender bending elements. I remember the TV spots playing like Aerosmith's like, dude looks like a lady, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. And he's doing like risky business with a broomstick or something. I was really excited to see it, but I kind of knew I was sort of getting myself into a precarious situation. And this was just a year before Ace Ventura. And I went to go see it for my 11th birthday with my mom. And there are a few scenes that are really shocking. And I know this is a bit more of like a sign of the times kind of film, whereas Ace Ventura is just kind of like irredeemable. I don't think it's bad. They should just destroy that film. Like Jim Carrey should apologize. But Mrs. Doubtfire has a lot of like playful elements to it, but there's also some really crazy reactions that people have when they discover Ace's kind of double life, and that Mrs. Doubtfire is in fact, here's a scene where she's going to urinate standing up, and her son is going to see it, and he's going to say, "Oh my God." We're going to watch his mouth say it. Yeah, there you go. He's mortified, and his first response, not knowing that this is his father, is to tell the sister and to call the police. And then he gets into this weird part where he's like, she's a he-she, she's a she-she. And then just after the son recommends attacking Mrs. Doubtfire with the tennis racket in the balls. So they want to attack Mrs. Doubtfire's genitals, call the cops on her. He finally is like, okay, I'm your dad. I'm doing this to spend time with you. And then the daughter kind of embraces him and they have a hug. And it's kind of sweet that he did all this just so he can spend time with his children now that he has less time with them because of a custody battle that's going on with his ex-wife. However, the son is still very reluctant to kind of take his dad back in. He offers him a very manly kind of handshake just to make sure that he's still a man. And in one of many moments in the film, the son also is like, you don't actually enjoy doing this, do you? And Mrs. Doubtfire, or Daniel is the character, his reply is like, no, of course not, God, no. And then all is a little more forgiven. As long as he kind of lets everyone know that he's not enjoying himself, and this is all just some ruse to like spend time with his kids. And this also feeds into the kind of the trans person, or the idea of transness being something for selfish gain, something that's there to trick other people, and something to like get ahead. And it just kind of keeps sort of stacking this kind of idea that trans people are just, it's just a very inauthentic thing to do. And you're conning other people, which is really kind of a bummer. So we all laughed. He did the risky business dance, and then these kind of moments happened. There's also a scene when he's trying to get the job, and he's trying to get this job and prevent everyone else from getting it. So he steals the number for this nanny application who Mrs. Doubtfire obviously gets. And he's playing all these caricatures. Everyone remembers that Robin Williams does these wacky voices from like Mork and Mindy and all that. So he's playing these really kind of crude representations of like a redneck and an immigrant. And then he plays someone who says that they hope they don't work with the males because they used to be one. And it's just like, all right, this is a bit of like, someone really has it in for us in this movie. And it's a fun family film that everyone loves, but nevertheless leaves a really sour aftertaste. But I just kind of also like the movie in a campy, weird way. And it's not as harmful, and it just does feel like a sort of ignorant movie that just kind of, I don't know, I don't think anyone was intentionally trying to be cruel or anything like that. Not that really Ace Ventura was intentionally trying to be cruel, but it's just not as idiotic.
You know, it's interesting, that scene that we showed there with the kids, when his son finds out that that's actually his father, you know, their reaction is to call the police and to attack this person. Well, actually, they didn't know it was their father yet, but was to attack this person who was presumably a trans individual. And, you know, that's kind of a scary thought. These kids are, you know, 11, 13 years old in the film. And their instinct in the film as written is to do harm to a trans individual. This is of someone who hasn't done any harm to them. But that was the initial reaction. And you wonder about other kids that are seeing this. This one kind of hits me at home a little bit because, you know, I have children, and I had to come out to them as trans. And for them, they were at an age where they didn't really have a chance to be influenced by any outside people yet. You know, my oldest was 6 years old when I came out. So when we had the conversation, it was pretty cut and dry. And they were more concerned about just having me still in their lives. So when kids get older and they see films like this, you know, that goes in their head, that goes in their mind. And I can't imagine somebody trying to come out to their kids who have already seen this film or been influenced by other people. And this is something that those kids have to process as part of their journey. And it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate to have that experience in there.
That's such a good point, because it does kind of reinforce I know there's a lot of stuff with the bathroom bills, and I'm in Canada, but I'm aware. And yeah, just the fact that this is like a criminal act. This is a child predator, which is like such a heinous thing to be accused of, where she's nurturing these children and taking care of them for all intents and purposes. And as soon as that's revealed, they're a child predator or someone who's going to endanger children. And I could see how that's really super problematic and triggering. And yeah, absolutely dehumanizing.
And coming from like my perspective growing up, when I was a young kid watching these films, like when I watched Ace Ventura or Mrs. Doubtfire, I wasn't aware of my trans identity at the time. Like I didn't come to that understanding until much later in life. But when you talk about internalizing these messages, I mean, that's what I was doing as a child. And it all kind of followed me on later in life to when I finally started to understand myself. I had all this baggage built up, all this internalized transphobia that was built up from a lot of things within media, like these representations that just told me that, you know, bad things were going to happen, that maybe I was a bad person because of this, or that, you know, I was lying to the people that I loved, and even had some people that I love kind of insinuate or ask me why I would lie to them after I had come out to them. And so having all of these things kind of build up, I mean, and internalized through the media, it's a really true, like, traumatic thing that I think a lot of us experience and hold with us as we grow up.
Here's the Blu-ray. Why do I own this? Even the thing is like, shh, don't tell anyone. She'll rock your world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very tasteful.
So
well,
why don't we move from these sort of difficult representations already to some much worse representations. And now we have sort of a category of selected movies where trans people are actually portrayed as murderers and as psychopathic sort of killers. So maybe we want to dive into some of these. Neila, I don't know where exactly you might want to start with these conversations.
We should probably start with in 1960. We'll go chronologically with Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock. It's one of the most acclaimed movies, and it's a great movie in so many ways. I love Psycho. I love Hitchcock. But it does, this was one of the early films too that really has this very kind of sad portrayal of someone who is, gender bending or is trans or has gender identity issues. In this case, it's a very kind of Freudian also, and it's Norman Bates who dresses up like his deceased mother and commits acts of murder. And this also ties into whenever he's attracted or a woman comes into his life, he's propelled to put on his mother's clothes and kill her. That's what he does to Marion Crane, who's played by Janet Leigh, Jamie Lee Curtis's mom. And there's the infamous scene where he stabs her in the shower and kind of penetrates her with that butcher knife after being kind of a peeping Tom and watching her undress in the shower. This kind of does create that sort of nature that people who cross-dress or people who are transgender or people who do that are, there's a serious conflict, an envy and a hate and a lust for women that leads to cis women that leads to murder, which is kind of scary and definitely kind of sets the stage for a lot of the other films we see, and that they're psychologically damaged. And I don't know if anyone else was a big fan of that film. And then there's also Dressed to Kill, which is a Brian De Palma film, and Brian De Palma is heavily influenced by Hitchcock. All of his films kind of riff on that. Some people say he's an auteur, and others say that he's like a Hitchcock ripper-offer. I would go with somewhere in between. I would go with the former. I think he still has a lot of great films. Carrie is one of my favorite films of all time. But Dressed to Kill really takes the psycho kind of motif with the trans woman and like runs with it. But before I talk about that, I was just wondering if anyone had any thoughts on Psycho, because it's considered this kind of elegant, classy film, and I'm sure everyone knows that scene. And kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with Psycho for sure. I know that we actually wanted to put a Dress to Kill scene in tonight's episode, but it was just too graphic. Some of the sequences in there, especially with the trans character. But I think we kind of see this a lot, especially in these earlier films, right? Psycho. I mentioned Glenn or Glenda earlier in the episode too, where, I mean, we're in a time period before transgender was even a word, right? Where it was cross-dressing, or the word transvestite was thrown around more often. That actual concept was very foreign in popular culture. So, you do have the Norman Bates character who is committing these atrocities, while dressed, and it again goes to that trope of not only is this person deranged, right, but they're using their gender issues or other mental issues in the film to commit horrible atrocities. Again, just very dangerous thoughts to put in people's minds. And it makes you wonder too, for people that grew up and saw Psycho, these are the baby boomers that were watching this film. How much did that affect them? How much does that affect people who are in office today here in the US and elsewhere, when it comes to understanding some of these feelings and thoughts? And, I think most people when they think of trans individuals, go to those memories, especially if they don't have anyone who's trans in their lives, you know, whether or not they know that anyone is trans in their lives. But that's kind of a scary thought that there are people out there that are capable of passing laws that maybe their only experience with trans individuals is in thrillers or movies that cast trans people as murderers and liars. That's a sad thought, but maybe true in some cases.
Yeah, and Dress to Kill is I don't know if you're familiar with Criterion Collection, but they put out. I'm a big fan of Criterion, and it's a continuing series of important classic and contemporary films. Dress to Kill, on an aesthetic level, is a very kind of seminal movie and the stuff that Brian De Palma did, but it's very like trashy deliberately. And it's just kind of funny to see this in the Criterion Collection for some reason. And obviously Michael Caine plays the killer. And Michael Caine is obviously a very well-known Sir Michael Caine. And also the language you brought up, Samantha, with transgender was not a word. And this is 20 years exactly later. This is 1980. And they still really do not have the right kind of language for it. And transsexual comes up. And at the end of Psycho, there's this scene where the doctor is kind of psychoanalyzing Norman Bates. And then there's like a 20-minute scene after the kind of denouement the movie should be wrapping up in Dress to Kill that they just keep going and going with this dual gender identities and how one is like, you can't have both. And it created this like murderous rampage, which is obviously someone's really having fun with this in an exploitation canon. And speaking of exploitation canons, I don't know if you were able to get a clip of this movie, Sleepaway Camp.
Unfortunately, I think we have a clip.
Oh, is it not on Criterion Collection?
No, it's not. Yeah, this is your pretty much classic campy late 70s, early 80s slasher flick, isn't it?
It sure is. Yeah, it came out early 80 in 1983. So we were just kind of bornish. And it's quite a doozy. It's actually like a lot of people like it. A lot of like, even in like queer spaces, this movie's like shown as like a super campy drinking game kind of movie. And I'll admit that I'm guilty of also indulging in that with certain like-minded friends. But it's a slasher film that takes place in camp, and it sort of came out pretty much after like Friday the 13th, where it's like, kids love seeing like campers get killed. This one's really bizarre. I don't know if you guys read the plot synopsis or know what you're in for, but this is like exploitation.
Yeah, I unfortunately actually watched. This is available on, I think it was on Amazon Prime Video. So
yeah, it is.
Yeah, if you want to just suffer for an hour and 25 minutes, feel free.
It's like so hilariously badly made that it's like amusing. It is definitely in the camp kind of canon. Like shots just don't match up, and like the acting is crazy, and it's also a very homoerotic film, which I find really interesting about it also being a very trans misogynistic film. That usually these slasher movies have like naked cis women. That's a very common thing, is to have sex and TNA. You got to have like your booby shot, and that's just kind of requisite. Whereas this movie is very, very fixated on like the male anatomy, and the boys actually wear the like shorter shorts than the girls, and they have tank tops that like go up to their nipples, and they go skinny dipping in one scene. You don't see any female nudity, but you do see a lot of like hairy bare butts and stuff, which is kind of fun. I listened to the director's commentary because I was like, is this some kind of like really progressive like satire or something? But I don't think they're really that clued into it. It's just like a weird anomaly where it's a really homoerotic movie and then it's like a really transphobic movie. So it's hilarious and I kind of love it, but the ending is crazy. And I remember being in high school, like everyone kind of rented horror movies. I grew up in like going to the video store and looking at the box, and it looked so like titillating. This movie, just wanted to rent it. It's so forbidden and gory, and you don't really see the ending coming. But then people started talking in school, being like, "Sleepaway Camp, that's the movie with the ending," and boy, does it have an ending. So this This girl goes to sleepaway camp with her cousin. She's being raised by her aunt after we see an opening scene where two siblings are in a boating accident and one of them perishes with their father. So you think that this girl is in camp and she's being teased mercilessly and she's kind of mute, and people are also being killed, but they don't show the killer. It's kind of like that, whodunit kind of thing. You see the murders through the eyes of the killer, like in Halloween or something. And you're waiting until the end of the film to find out who's the killer. And then it's revealed that, yes, she is the killer, but she turns around, and this is this like, then there's this whole like backstory stuff explaining it, that she was one of the twins, but she was the male surviving twin who was then raised against their will to be female, and then goes to camp as a presumably female camper, kills everyone, kills this guy that's trying to like sleep with her, and then she gets up naked and spins around, and the camera zooms out, and it's a really bizarre kind of effect because it's like a male body with a mannequin on it. So it pans out and you see this like full frontal again with a penis, and then the film just like ends and you're like, whoa.
It's so abrupt. I mean, literally the movie is over. It ends right there.
Yeah. They don't unpack it. They don't do anything. It ends.
You're just kind of left going, what just happened?
Yeah.
It's horrifying. But I mean, deconstruct the character, right? And again, we've got some dangerous ideas in here that are still talked about today in popular culture. So you've got a child who was involved in a traumatic incident, and after that incident was raised as the other sex by their crazy aunt. This is something that we still deal with in trans conversations today. You know, people are worried that parents are imposing gender identities or gender ideals on kids, and that, you know, kids can't, know or understand what their gender identity is at a young age. And here we have someone who is shown as being forced into a different gender role. Very dangerous thought structure there. I think that's still damaging now. Thoughts on that?
Definitely. I mean, I also feel like while I wasn't forced into a role that I didn't really want, I kind of forced myself and went along with it. There's obviously trauma in being assimilated as a gender that you really don't feel you truly are. I never killed I did go to sleepaway camp. I didn't kill anyone. But yeah, that's just like an interesting topic. It's like a hot topic. And then it also about, like you were saying, all the people who think that like it's really irresponsible to do this to your children and raise them this way. Again, this isn't all these characters. This is another character who's not trans by will or by choice, but it still keeps planting these like seeds. And when I was in high school, just the way everyone kind of talked about the movie, and it was just like the freak show movie ending, and it was just like another notch in the belt that was like, this is crappy. I don't know. It's just all downhill kind of. A lot of psychopaths. And then obviously there's the biggest, probably the most prestigious film of everything, maybe it's not Psycho, but Silence of the Lambs was like a huge Oscar sweeping film, directed by the late Jonathan Demme. And this movie has a character named Buffalo Bill that is pretty much like a laundry list of every like horrible stereotype of a trans person, a homosexual, like this little puppy dog, and he traps these women, and he's building a skin suit out of women to wear over his body. He gives them lotion in this little well. It's really harrowing, and it's obviously a film that everyone held in very high regard. There was a lot of backlash for the film, actually, at the Academy Awards. There were a lot of protesters, and Jonathan Demme did actually acknowledge that later on and say that, he might not have been his wheelhouse. And he did go, his follow-up film was Philadelphia, which again, some people really criticized and some people thought was great. And it's a bit of a mixed bag in itself too. It definitely is a polished kind of straight guy making a movie about AIDS epidemic, and Tom Hanks is playing an AIDS someone who's dying of AIDS. So I don't know. Again, Silence of the Lambs is like the big one. That was the one everyone was talking about. I don't think my parents saw Sleepaway Camp, but everyone was talking about Silence of the Lambs. I remember seeing it at the Oscars. And wasn't that Buffalo Bill just such a deranged psychopath? He seems like an amalgam of everything that was kind of making me feel terrible. And I don't know if you guys saw that movie when you were younger and how it felt, and if you were like, hey, because back then no one was really talking about that character that much. Like, yeah, it's just a crazy psycho. But you're like, I don't know, as years went by, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this movie. It's not sitting well. And yeah, they could have maybe humanized that character a little more.
Yeah, I know I saw it in my late teens originally. And again, that was at a time where I pretty much knew what I was dealing with and struggling with. And looking for any sort of inspiration, looking for any way forward as a young closeted trans kid, these were the only people that were available to me. And that's terrible. And you have to keep in mind too, okay, yeah, I'm 36 years old. And although the internet was around in the late 90s, it was nothing like today. And the resources available that are available today were basically non-existent. So whatever was on screen or magazines, that was basically the only exposure I had to trans individuals. And I feel like this is another film that just sort of pushed me back down, that, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. I'm not this person. Can I just transition and just be? And very confusing thoughts to work through as a teenager and dealing with these thoughts. And you mentioned that this film, of course, has the prestige, it has the visibility. I know that I've had quotes from this film used against me online and things like that for people trying to be abusive or transphobic. So it's still in the mindset. This movie came out 28 years ago. It still has that exposure. It still has that connection with trans individuals, and that shows just how damaging just one film can be.
Absolutely. And yeah, if it wasn't like killers on the screen at that time, it's like Jerry Springer and all that craziness on television. But I also went through a similar feeling of, I knew kind of what was going on with me, but I was like, I am not a serial killer or like a crazy person or someone who's, I don't know, like on Jerry Springer, like marrying someone and they don't even know what anatomy you have and then shocking them on television. I'm pretty sure that was scripted. But I just felt like everywhere I went, it was just like the circus. And I was just like, I don't want to join the circus. I just want to be this like normal kid. And obviously it's the antithesis. I do think that coming out and living kind of authentically, I function so much better. Like I was dysfunctional, not to that degree, but when I was hiding as someone else. But expressing myself this way is so antithetical to what these movies are like feeding into society and like feeding into people's brains and these seeds that they're planting, that we're just like, I don't know, we're just psychopaths, I guess. We're psychos. It's the name of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that Samantha made earlier about what people have in their minds when they're thinking about transgender people and how it ties to this media. And I mean, I'm kind of comparing and contrasting as we talk, like my experience of not yet understanding my identity until much later in life versus both of your experiences of kind of knowing at a younger age. And I mean, either way, we're sort of carrying these stigmas and all of this content with us. And, at least at the end of the day, we have ourselves as like a one transgender person that we know, that you can look at and be like, well, I'm not a psychopath. So like, hopefully this can work out. Not that it doesn't, hold you back or create a lot of barriers for you, because it does. But to think of all of the people where they're thinking, well, these are the only portrayals of transgender lives that they have. And it's kind of scary. It's its own horror film. Like, to think about it.
Sure. Yeah, it made
right?
me think, like,
Wow.
maybe I'm not trans enough if I feel this way or something. Like, maybe this is like halfway trans because I'm not crazy. But yeah, it definitely kept me in the closet probably longer than it could have. As much as films were there to like coddle me and help raise me, they also scared the crap out of me and really reinforced that, like, I gotta go on a killing rampage or just stay in the closet. It was like A or B. I don't know. But it was kind of terrifying.
So there's a whole other category of films I want to touch on too. These aren't necessarily trans-specific films, but they deal with transition or transformation. And I think a lot of trans people, especially growing up, watch these films and either saw them as inspiration or they felt something when they saw them. And I know for me, some of these movies here, they had a way of stirring kind of a feeling of unease in me, these transformation movies. And I never really understood what those feelings were when I was younger, but I was drawn to these movies. And I don't think it was until much later that I realized that this is sort of kind of a low-grade dysphoria, that discomfort of watching someone transform or have the ability to transform when I knew I didn't. So let's take a look at a couple of these here. I think the first one we have is actually a pretty celebrated child or kid movie. Actually, let's talk about The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I thought we were cueing something. Yeah, The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
So exciting.
So the funny story about The Little Mermaid, I saw this movie in theaters when I was 6 years old. And I remember seeing this movie when it came out. And this is a story I haven't shared to anybody before. So this is brand new. This is fresh. I was 6 years old. I wanted to go see All Dogs Go to Heaven. My sister wanted to see Little Mermaid. She won that argument. And we went to go see Little Mermaid. And I remember watching it so vividly, watching Ariel, want so much to be human, to be able to be with, where the people are, right? And those feelings of confusion, and these movies always sat really strangely with me, these transformation films, watching someone be able to transform. And I wanted to transform. It was something that stuck with me for my entire life.
Yeah. For me, Ariel was kind of a trans metaphor before I knew what metaphors were. She's born with, obviously, a part of her anatomy that prevents her from being who she longs to be. And she, at the same time, everyone is kind of like, you have all this privilege, like you're a princess of the sea. Why do you want to go above and be with these other people? And she has this grotto where we see her in right now, where she sings this I Want song that's like one of, some people would say is maybe like the most celebrated Disney kind of anthem, Part of Your World, which was almost not even going to be in the movie. Due to test screenings with some really silly kids who didn't like it, but it thankfully made it. And she has these, she has all these like artifacts from the this other world from above the sea. And that really resonated with me because I actually kind of wrote about this, that when I was a kid, I obviously did accumulate like a secret stash. And I went through that like really cliche thing of like getting it and throwing it out and re-getting it and binging and purging with my secret stash. And it all started with this toy I had, this My Little Pony doll named Blossom. And I had this Blossom doll and I kept her buried underneath like my G.I. Joes and my Micro Machines, which I also liked. But somehow I convinced my mom to buy me this Blossom doll. And because it was in that like area in Toys R Us that really haunted me whenever I went as a kid, that like super bright pink aisle, all the Barbies. And that was like when the gender divide was it was like, it felt like a million miles away. Like to walk into that aisle it was forbidden. But I got my mom to buy me this doll. I don't even remember how I convinced her to do it. And I would hide it under when people would come over, but it was like, I loved this doll so much. And even then, we're talking like, this is pre Little Mermaid for me. I was like 4 or 5, and I would just kind of like keep it buried under all these toys, because even then I knew that it was like kind of shameful to have it, and that if I had friends that saw it or other people, they would call me a sissy. So I really kind of connected with Ariel on that level. And then her father finds her secret stash in her grotto, and he burns it all with his trident. And that kind of propels her to go forward and meet Ursula. It's actually like kind of based on Divine from the John Waters films, which is I find interesting. But she makes this deal, this Faustian deal, to go above the water and have these legs, and she can be human if she gets a prince to kiss her or someone to kiss her, but without the ability to speak. So obviously, just on an anatomical level and on kind of a hoarding things, it's just so on the nose for me. It really was. And I even kind of knew it at the time. I didn't know why that particular Disney princess was so close to me, but I obviously know that now. And it's really great. And obviously the mermaid is a frequent kind of symbol for trans people too, because it's just kind of a clean slate down there. And I think it's like a great movie, and I love it, and I watch it all the time.
So moving from The Little Mermaid to sort of a classic movie that we now know is strife with trans undertones, and that is The Matrix. And this was a huge movie in the summer of 1999 when it came out. It revolutionized cinema in a lot of ways. The Wachowskis did some amazing cinematography with it. They pushed the limits of what was possible in cinema at the time. And here, I'll let you talk through this one a little bit, Neila.
Okay, well, this is a really important scene with the blue and the red pill. So shortly after the final trilogy kind of wrapped up, this is when people were just taking these as these cool like cyber action movies that were way better than Phantom Menace. When Phantom Menace came out, and everyone thought that was going to be the cool summer movie, and then The Matrix kind of blew it out of the water. So yeah, there was these stories about the director who at the time went by Lara Wachowski, and Rolling Stone published this article in 2004 that was like the mysterious world of this director, this elusive director. And they were kind of revealing all these interesting facts and saying like that they were into this and that, and they're cross-dressing, and it was all revealed through someone who was dating one of their girlfriends who was actually Buck Angel, and they got Buck Angel to say all this stuff. And I remember reading it and being like, this is so interesting. Why is Rolling Stone writing this like tabloidy expose on this filmmaker? And I was like, is this real, or is this a reclusive kind of filmmaker myth making? And then obviously shortly after, Lana Wachowski came out, and a lot of things started to make sense about The Matrix. The Matrix has a lot of really interesting allegorical elements to it about kind of this Alice through the looking glass and entering your real world and kind of getting out of your matrix and getting out of this comfort false reality and entering the real reality and kind of fighting for that. And you take a red pill. Incidentally, I think when I take it, it's a blue pill, but you get the point. And sort of like taking sort of HRT for me was kind of like taking that pill and being like, do you want to see how far the rabbit hole goes? And I did kind of. So seeing that movie now, it's really interesting, kind of the two universes and crossing over into that. And now the Wachowskis are the Wachowskis. Both of them are beautiful and great, and I love Speed Racer also. I'm just going to do a Speed Racer plug. It's a really cool movie. What else do you guys think of The Matrix? It's cool.
I just learned a lot of stuff about The Matrix that I admittedly, shamefully did not know. I'm like the worst movie person ever. That's so great.
Yeah, Through the Looking Glass is such a great way to look at it, right? And there's reference in the movie too, of course, multiple times. Once you get to a certain point in your gender journey, there is no going back. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle, right? Once Neo is awakened to what the world actually is and what's possible, that sets his course forward. He can't plug back in, and it's a one-way street. And I think that's kind of it's a scary situation for trans individuals to be in. It's scary to know that if you decide to go forward, this is it. As transition goes, largely it's a one-way street, right? So I definitely see that now. But again, this is one of those movies where I came back to it again and again and again. This is one of the first movies I owned on DVD back when DVDs were new, and was drawn to it. And again, it's that story of transition, of becoming something more, of learning about oneself. And I'm just drawn to those type of movies. And there are other movies in this category too. I think more recently, Avatar falls in that category as well for me. Again, sort of a through the looking glass type situation and understanding oneself better. Not necessarily trans specific, but dealing with transformation as a person and as a soul.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely on a very meaningful level, considering the backstory of the filmmakers. And also, I like what you said about not going back. I remember before I kind of took the whatever color pill, I didn't really fully anticipate what kind of an emotional journey it would put me on, and like how it kind of was like someone put a fire out in my head, or like the clouds parted, and I couldn't go back. I remember having a moment where I sort of was apprehensive about continuing because it just kind of started, and I was like, whoa, am I ready to come out? Am I ready to do this? This is it. And I had already kind of unplugged and out of the matrix, and I really did feel like I had seen something, like a different side of myself, and seen the world through a different lens, and it was just impossible to think of going back to whatever creature comforts I had before that, because mentally I was just I was out of the matrix. But it's really fun that we both kind of connected on that. It's a long time ago, but it's a really exciting movie, and it was great that they continue to make stuff. And obviously Sense8 is another really well-loved film series in the community. And I'm very grateful for The Matrix and The Wachowskis. And not Rolling Stone. Sorry, Rolling Stone. You shouldn't have done that. It was a little sleeper. So, yes. I guess we could go to the next sort of section.
Yeah, so why don't we move to that next category? So this category are some more recently released films, and they mainly have a somewhat problematic theme of having cis actors playing trans characters, even when maybe trans actors are available and willing to play those parts. So Neila, where would you like to start us off with for this category?
I guess we'll just go chronologically. I remember being in high school when Boys Don't Cry came out, and I think I was in the 9th grade, and Hilary Swank, I believe, won tons of accolades for this role, playing Brenda Tina, and obviously did a lot of good too, in the sense. I mean, it brought a lot of. It's a very sympathetic role that Swank plays in this, and it's a heartfelt movie, and it's done by a good director. It's very solid performances. One of the first pretty has an indie feel to it, and a pretty authentic feel, but of course it's still this actor won all these kind of accolades for doing the thing that a lot of them do in these films, which is that kind of acting flex, where you're just I'm doing this. This is my Forrest Gump. This is my this. It's just you're playing it almost like a disability or something, and then being praised for that, just to be look at the range I could do with my acting. It's like Tom Hanks losing all this weight for Philadelphia is the same as doing it for Castaway, but not exactly. I think at the time, I don't know if anyone would even consider looking for anyone authentic to play that role. Whereas time is going on and people are getting a little more irritated by films that don't do that. So I guess I would jump ahead to Girl, which just came out, and in between those there was obviously Dallas Buyers Club and Danish Girl, but it can be kind of troubling to do that. And when you don't let people tell their own story, this is also directed by a cis male, and it is loosely based on a trans woman who was consulting in it. I know that there wasn't too much consultation in the film, and this movie has a lot of interesting elements to it, but it is also a really dangerous movie in a lot of ways and really focuses on the body horror. But I don't know if before we go into that, does anyone want to discuss Boys Don't Cry a little more and how that affected them and what it was like seeing that film like 20 years ago?
Oh yeah, that one got me. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of the movies we've talked about tonight and a lot of just media and film in general, I feel like there is a lot more focus towards, cis men in women's roles. And growing up, I didn't see portrayals of trans men until I saw Boys Don't Cry. And it was revolutionary for me in a way that I didn't at all understand. Like when I saw it, I don't know how young I would have been when I saw it, but I was relatively young. And I just remember just like crying, just uncontrollably crying and not at all knowing why. And like every time I would see it, if I ever rewatched it, I would always have that reaction, and I would always just be so confused, and I would tie it. I guess I had all these explanations in my head of how sad the story is, because it is a very sad story, and it's actually very kind of traumatic and gruesome and hard to watch in many, many cases. And all of those things were kind of culminating in my own head of like, is this going to happen to me? Like, if this deep truth in me is really true, is this going to happen to me? And it's that weird mixture of like finally seeing yourself in media and it kind of pulling the revelation out of you, but also in a way that totally terrifies you. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it was a very influential movie for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the flip side of how trans people are represented. I think I read about this in Whipping Girl, that there's kind of like, there's either the psychopath and the violent killer that we saw before, or there's also like the pitiful character who's just, you feel so sorry for, and there's no real in between. But now we're starting to see that a little bit more. I remember that film, Boys Don't Cry, it's a movie that anyone can universally see, and you'd have to be a pretty like stone cold person to not empathize with a film like that or with a character like that and what they're going through, especially when it's told through like, someone who's recognizable as an actor. Sometimes that can be like a Trojan horse, which can have some positive effect in that it does bring people in. I remember in my high school, we did watch the film also, and we talked about issues regarding it, and that kind of visibility did a lot of good as well. But for every movie like that, there are more disingenuous ones. I'm not in love with Dallas Buyers Club and like Jared Leto's kind of over the top performance. I remember feeling very kind of I just felt kind of icky after watching it. I remember seeing one of the first screenings of it at the Toronto Film Festival, and I remember Jared Leto also went to the awards after and I think he just completely didn't acknowledge the trans community upon accepting his award. And I thought that was really kind of crappy. But it just seemed like really extreme acting and like a really pitiful character, a really like pitiable character, just kind of thrown in there. And it's also, I just hate when it feels like a narrative device or like a plot point, especially when it's not played or told by someone who's really lived that experience. There's something that kind of creeps me out about it, that makes me feel a little like violated or misrepresented. And then you have different cases in a film like The Danish Girl, which is Eddie Redmayne. He also did The Theory of Everything that year. He was really stretching his acting chops. But this is playing a character who probably physiologically didn't have access to HRT and wouldn't be able to have it. I mean, I don't think that should prevent a trans person from playing this character. But again, it just that film felt like a really kind of half-baked portrayal of something that I really wanted it to dig deeper in. I just found that character to be very like aloof and just kind of a wallflower, and really just like the feeling of stockings and putting on dresses, and it had that very like sterile Hollywood Oscar baity movie, which Dallas Buyers Club also gave me that feeling. Boys Don't Cry feels a little more dynamic than that to me. Then when you really feel that like Oscar sheen over like a trans character like that, it just something like it just rubs me the wrong way. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I mean, it's cool that everyone talks about it, I guess, but you can still have great movies like A Fantastic Woman or something have presence at the Oscars. But those movies just feel so like, oh, it's just, I don't know, it's like a machine just printed them out. And this is like, oh, bingo, okay, it's the trans one now. We're going to do the trans one. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you really touched on it, right? Some of these movies were Oscar grabs. These were movies designed to show those acting chops of these fairly big name actors in their careers. And that basically sums up trans representation on the big screen in the like mid 2000s to early 2000 teens. We're gonna put a big name up there. They're gonna show how amazingly talented they are, that they could play a character that is so inconceivable for a cis person to play, right, Jan? And you end up with these exaggerated characters, these characters that feel more Harlequin than anything else, right? Where's the heart in these characters? What's the real drive other than showing that, Jared Leto can wear mascara? There's nothing beneficial. And maybe you can make an argument that some of those films allowed for later films to be made with trans leads, as it, quote unquote, softened up the audience. But I still think there's a lot of damage. And it is damaging to have cis actors play trans characters, and especially in some of these movies in particular. The Danish Girl, you're telling the story of basically the first trans media sensation. I can't think of a better example of a story to tell where you could actually have a trans individual star in that role, and it just feels sort of wasted on an Oscar grab at that point. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
No, definitely. They're like a prop almost, and they're so aesthetically so pleasing, and it's very dilute, and it's an easy pill to swallow in that way. And it is a bit of just I have a very conflicting feeling about it. It's kind of a trip to see people talking about it in a sympathetic light even, but it's also like a very half-baked kind of, come on, let's just do this already kind of thing.
Right.
And then on the small screen,
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to move forward with how there are some kind of positive portrayals.
Yeah.
But was there one of the other films you want to talk about?
No, let's talk about that. Let's actually wrap up the whole conversation by looking at some of the recent examples of positive portrayals in the media, and examples where trans people are actually getting involved in some of these productions today. So yeah, let's take a look at some of those.
Yeah, there's been a lot of great stuff. One of the first ones of these batches was a few years ago when I saw Tangerine, which is a hilarious and really great movie, and it's filled with people who are authentically playing themselves, and it has a very honest kind of feel to it, which I found very refreshing, and was like, I don't need friggin' Jared Leto to do this. Like, this is great. And it just felt really honest and real, and I think it's really important to let people tell their own story. I think there's a time and a place for other people to tell other stories or to use things as plot devices, but we haven't gotten there yet. And we need to give more trans people the opportunity to play themselves, to direct, to write, and to tell their story. And then others can obviously have the floor too to do that. But some of these works like Tangerine and Sense8, and more recently Pose, Shameless, and transparent. I don't want to get into Jeffrey Tambor, but there are a lot of people who are cut away, who are getting to tell a story from an authentic perspective. And it's really effective, and it definitely is like next level effective to me. And I don't have to, these are things also for me too. Like, I'm glad that The Danish Girl and Dallas Buyers Club, etc., are good for people who are totally not really used to this. But I can't really begin to describe like the euphoria it is, or the rush of seeing like a really great representation and seeing like successful trans person doing something like that. Like when I saw A Fantastic Woman, and just like seeing all these positive outcomes, and it doesn't have that bitter aftertaste that it's that there's this kind of, it's a consolation, or this is how we can do it if we want to do it. There's no buts. It's just done really well. It's done right, and it's done authentically. And I mean, there should be more opportunities to do that. There's really no excuse not to get out there. There are a lot of really talented people who work in Hollywood or outside, and it's paying off really well to do that. And I think the small screen more so is really taking advantage of that. And I'm hoping to see more and more representations of that. What's really great and stuff is like Sense8 and even Transparent is it does kind of at the center there are trans characters, but it really kind of branches off from that. They're not tokenized in the way that they often were, and it kind of, we move forward from that, and they're just characters, like, and they're just people, and this not everything has to be this like harrowing bummer story, or this like psychological thriller horror movie, or this body horror, like, oh, we were gonna talk about Girl, which has this like really over the top ending. And they can also just be kind of low key and just tell these authentic stories about people, and I find that to be really good, and I really hope that trend continues, and I'm confident that it will, because there's been a lot of success in this and a lot of acclaim, and people seem to be enjoying them.
Yeah, I think yeah, I know, it's like seeing like trans people play trans characters and having like trans like casts and crews like helping on these productions and writing, like you get complexity out of these stories like you just never have before. Like, I mean, I just think like here, Pose, it's just like watching Pose brings me so much like euphoria. I'm just like, I feel like I'm in a room surrounded by my best friends, and like, but in that show they also talk about difficult and real subjects and real content in hard parts of life and that times and the AIDS crisis and being a transgender woman, but in like a real complicated way that doesn't just focus on like pain or pity, but like, you see the euphoria in them and the celebration and their lives and like the realness. And it's, that's compelling. Like that's real storytelling. And that's the difference that I see, and that I think a lot of us are seeing when you have, representative actors and actresses in these roles that really know, the life and the story, and can bring that fire to it. I mean, I think of like Shameless and the trans man on that show as well. And that was like a breakthrough moment for me. And this was around the time when I was like understanding my gender identity and coming out. And this story of this character in Shameless is complicated. It's not without struggle, but it's also like he identifies as like a gay man and they're in this gay relationship. And for me, I was like, oh, that's an option. Like I can be transitioned to a man and, still love my male partner and like be gay. And I was like, oh, what? And like, it was amazing. And you got to see the beauty and like love in that relationship. And I was like, oh, like, wow, okay. Like you can do that. And, it had so much more power to it, to that story, because there was realness in it,
Yeah. That beats like all the, I don't know, all the actor training and all the awards kind of skills that they can do. That's what really brings it when it really pops out of the screen or really pops off the page, is just having that realness that you can't really learn in like theater school or something like that. It just has to be coming from a real place within, and it really pays off. So Jared, you're a great actor sometimes, but sorry,
Mm-hmm.
All right. I did want to take a look at some of the questions that our viewers submitted. So I want to hop over there really quick. The first question we had for the audience was, what does the ideal representation of a transgender person look like to you? And Neila, I'll let you start with this one.
Honestly, just being themselves and not having all those, having props and having things and just all these things that distract from that. I really think that just getting someone to authentically tell their story is still a totally original thing that hasn't been done enough, and we don't need to sensationalize it with all these layers in terms of plot, in terms of characterization, in terms of physical transformation. I really just think stripping it down to its kind of bare bones is, and going from the ground up is kind of the ideal representation for me. I want to see more of that.
All right, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like representing just life, like all of it. Like you don't have to, it's not some, terrible sort of like sad story. It can be celebratory, but it can also be like mundane. Like I just want like a transgender person like lounging on their couch eating pizza, like watching TV, like like I just want like just some random ass sitcom that's like just doing normal stuff, like because that's like it's life. Like if we're trans, but we're like people, like we live like normal lives and do normal things, and it's not 24/7 transition or 24/7 terrorization. And those things are important and they're a part of the story, but they're not the whole story. Like give me more pizza eating. That's what I want.
I'm down for pizza eating, and I agree with what you both said. Right, I want a protagonist that they might happen to be trans, but that's not what's driving the story or plot to the movie that they're in. Right, I think that's important. There are trans people everywhere in the world. We're everywhere, and we most of the time are doing fairly mundane things and going about our lives. And I think it's important to capture that and to show that not every trans movie has to be a statement. But I think there's power in having trans people in those roles of everyday living. So I think we're all talking about the same general thing here.
Yeah, a really boring, banal trans movie would be great. Just
I mean, they're
real time going grocery shopping.
No. I will say that there are stories that are important to tell, and if we are telling those stories, they better be actual trans people playing those roles. But I do think that recognition in everyday life is important to maintain and to keep showing.
Yeah. So do we want to go to our next question? Okay. Any advice for any aspiring social justice screenwriter? This came in through Instagram, and I'm not, they qualified the screenwriter as social justice screenwriter. I guess you can take this any which way you want, or maybe you want to go broader as maybe any advice for, say, an aspiring queer or trans individual who's interested in getting into like media or TV or film as well. I mean, I think all of these things sort of intersect. So if you want to take it more from your experiences in where you're at in the industry, maybe that might be helpful too.
Well, I was fortunate that yes, like I work in a large city in an industry where there's a lot of diversity, and I don't feel as that anything that has happened to me recently has really hindered me from that. In fact, it's really helped me kind of grow, and I feel like I have a lot to say and people want to listen. I just say definitely don't let yourself stand in your own way at all, and just kind of be loud and be out there and do it, and find the right communities that are accepting, find groups of people who want to do stuff, and don't just treat it like you would either way. I wouldn't see that as an obstacle at all. I would see that as an advantage, and you have a great perspective and a great story. And there's more of us in numbers just doing stuff like this is what's going to make it just the new normal.
Yeah.
So keep writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great advice. Yeah. Just keep chugging along. Do it. Own your story. Yeah. Cool. I think we have one more that came in before the live questions. So this question is, why is it so important for the media to romanticize the struggle of trans folks?
Well, the media needs a scoop. You need to sensationalize. No one wants the boring story we want, the pizza story.
Yeah.
So everything has to be romanticized. I mean, you got to sell. You got to have a hook. Unfortunately, so I just think that's just on trend with how the media really does anything. Obviously, there's a lot of like mystery and intrigue to it, and a lot of people just want to know. It's like the unknown is very intriguing to people, whether that's like going to another planet or transitioning. People are obsessed with that kind of, so they're always going to gravitate towards the more sensational aspects of it, or the more romanticized, just the more heightened version of it. Hollywood loves that. I mean, that's probably never going to change for any subject matter, but yeah, I just feel like it's part and parcel with just the mentality of Hollywood and how people consume entertainment. Maybe they'll make like a boring reality show one day, but
fingers crossed.
I don't really want them to do. Yeah, fingers crossed. Big Brother, something. I don't know. Actually, no, I'll probably be really bad.
No.
I don't want to say that.
Let's not go there.
So we did have a couple of other questions that came in on the YouTube live chat tonight. I wanted to get to a couple of these here. So excuse me while I read them off my phone, but do you see a benefit in portraying trans individuals in historical fiction as normalized? Or are we just sort of destined to always be silent or sorrowful characters in those type of movies?
I think we've seen a bit of a trajectory here in the titles we've been watching, and I think the last stuff we've been touching upon is starting to reach a certain point that's starting to be kind of almost maybe like tolerable for us. But I'm definitely it's sometimes it's 2 steps forwards and then 10 steps back, or it's a very slow progress. But I do think that eventually, just like any minority is represented, it gets better and better, and then we'll have our like Love, Simon movie too, where it's just like, oh, you made a cool quirky John Hughes movie and everyone's trans and it's cool. We'll get like our vanilla trans movie. But I'm confident that that's going to happen if we just look at what history is kind of doing here. And I just think that the more and more people who get to tell their own story will definitely push us in that direction.
Yeah. So we have one more live question from the live stream, and I'm just going to read it here. Why are there so many cisgender actors playing transgender characters? Any evidence that this is changing for the better? I mean, we kind of hit on this, but maybe we can go over it a little more.
Well, yeah, money talks. When you're making a Hollywood movie, you want to see what the payoff is, and if you have Eddie Redmayne in your movie, like that's a big payoff. So as far as big awards, accolades, films, I think, Hollywood is a little behind. I did mention A Fantastic Woman a few times, which was nominated for Best Foreign Language Picture, and had, I think it was the first time a trans woman was on stage presenting an award, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember like crying because I was watching that. I'd just come out, and then there was the Academy Awards, which I work on every year, and I was saying like, wouldn't it be crazy if you saw a trans person here? And then like it just kind of like materialized, and I was like, whoa, did I do that? So yeah, I think that Hollywood will always have an appetite for making money, and I think the small screen is definitely a good vehicle for also people being a little more open-minded and trying to not necessarily make the kind of big picture kind of sweeping epics with recognizable actors and unfortunately, cis actors are far more popular and recognizable than trans actors, and I'm sure producers think that it's much easier to gain the sympathies of the audience if they recognize that actor and they've seen them. And to a certain degree, I don't disagree that it doesn't add a certain level of humanity in a really primitive way to show people like, oh, if Jared Leto can do it, like maybe they're not so bad, or something like that, something twisted. But yeah, it's a weird cycle right now.
It's a cycle, right? And it's a loop. And although there is some of that humanity there, I will give you that, it never allows trans individuals to ever enter that cycle in the first place, right? How can there ever be a trans blockbuster star if they never have the chance to be cast in a film where they would be perfect to play? So it's sort of self-defeating to not include trans actors in those roles. But as you said, right, money talks in Hollywood. And that, I think, is why we've seen so many of the castings we have seen. But there's been so much outcry recently here. And I can't remember the name of the movie right now. I'm sure you do. It's Scarlett Johansson was supposed to play a trans guy. Do you remember the film?
Yeah, that was.
Off the top of my head.
I know, and she just. And then she went back and like apologized for it, and then they said that she was going to put stuff towards it, which is great. So that was like a really good way of kind of correcting something. And I do think, people like Jamie Clayton, people are starting to be a little more known. You see them in magazines, see them talked about. And I totally agree with you, Samantha, that it is, at the end of the day, it's like not helping itself by doing that. And you have to come to a point where you're like, okay, we need to let these people play themselves. They need to be seen. Like, no one's going to notice you if you're not out there. So if you're just invisible, then you'll never be visible. But I don't think we're there yet at all. But I hope, in 20 more years, we can look at a bunch more cycles that like nudged us closer and closer to where we wanted to go, We're just in this weird
and I think
area.
We are heading that direction.
Yeah, it's cool we can talk about it, and we have examples.
Definitely. And I've been watching the chat occasionally here during tonight's conversation. And for every movie we named, I think the chat brought up 5 other movies that kind of fell into these categories as well. And we didn't set out to be all inclusive here tonight, but we wanted to hit on some of the ones that affected us in particular. And I know that a lot of people can relate to the stories that we shared here as well. So I think this is an important conversation, a great conversation. And Neila, I thank you so much for being a part of it here tonight. This has been fantastic.
That was so fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
It's really great. Thanks so much, guys.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'll tune in to the next
stick around
one
for just a second here. Yeah, stick around. I want to talk really quick about our next week's episode, actually.
Yes, next week on the show, we will be joined by Chris Rhodes. Chris is a social media influencer. He's a blogger, and he actually co-founded a company here, the brand Flaunt Streetwear. Yes, it's actually my secret skill, Samantha, of talking over your line, but I'm just going to acknowledge it and move on. We are going to be talking to Chris about his life and his transition, and also starting and running his own small business. So be sure to tune in to next week's episode to see that.
Yep, same time, same place. We're going to be here at 7:30 Pacific, 10:30 Eastern, here on Trans IRL, on YouTube and Facebook, as long as we don't get taken down for copyright infringement like we did on Facebook tonight. So we got in trouble for our clips over there. Oh, well.
Oops.
Oh, well. Before we go, if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Trans IRL. All of our past episodes are loaded up there. We're also on Facebook at Trans IRL Show and Instagram at Trans IRL. Be sure to like us and follow us there as well. So I would like to pull everyone back on here and just say thanks around the room once again. This was a really enlightening conversation tonight.
Thanks for cutting
Super
back to
fun.
red, like the Something About Mary hair.
Playing with your hair. But Neila, thanks for bringing your experiences with you. I think
Thank
this was
you.
great
So
and
much
kind of
fun.
helped me unpack a lot of my childhood traumas as well.
Good.
While reliving
Yeah. Oh
some
my
of them.
God, I learned so much. Yeah.
All right.
Super
I would like to
fun.
say thanks to Addison in the Trans IRL control room for all the work she does for us behind the scenes every week. Thanks everyone for watching. As always, we'll see you next week at the same time. Have a great night, everybody.